Hello and welcome to Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only LGBTQ plus daily evening television news, broadcasting live and available on demand on all smart televisions, including Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, Amazon Fire TV, YouTube, and Facebook. It's time to queer up the news. It is Thursday, April 6th, 2023. We are live and literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we are going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
I'm John Hayden from South Florida Gay News. Al has the night off. This evening, we bring you the news of our LGBTQ plus community from South Florida, America, and across our planet.
This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ plus evening news show. Whatever happens unique in LGBTQ plus news, you will see it and hear it.
Hotspots Magazine Happening Out Television Network is a nonprofit 501c3 media company in the same model of PBS and NPR, but designed for the LGBTQ plus community. Our mission is to support the 10 pillars of our LGBTQ plus community. We want to inform and educate the key issues of our Black community, Latino, lesbian, trans, students, youth, seniors, HIV/AIDS healthcare, business, political advocacy, and faith. Help us support our community.
We are part of one of the largest LGBTQ plus media companies in America, Hotspots Magazine, and Happening Out Television Network. Our magazine is celebrating 38 years of the LGBTQ plus experience, and our television news, talk, and entertainment shows support our mission to educate the LGBTQ plus and broader communities.
Well, let's begin this evening by meeting our fabulous panel. And up first, Adriana Tender. Adriana is a transgender advocate and healthcare practitioner. She has extensive education and experience in HIV prevention and healthcare that relates to transgender individuals. She currently works as the program coordinator with Trans Inclusive Group and is the owner of Tender Loving Care Trans Mentoring. She received the Bishop S.F. Makalani Mahi Transgender Advocate Award in 2019 and has received many other awards as well. She serves on the National Board of Governors for the Human Rights Campaign and is on the Board of Directors for the Dolphin Democrats and Black LGBTQ Liberation. She's also a member of several civic and political organizations, including the NAACP, Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus, and attends Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. Welcome, Adriana.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me.
You know, last year on Transgender or Trans Inclusive Group,
Yes.
It was a fabulous event last week. I know everybody on the team put a lot into it, but you're here, so I'm going to thank you and congratulate you on a wonderful program.
Thank you for coming. It was amazing. I will say that. It was glad to have everybody there. Let's welcome anchor Bob Henshaw. Bob is an accountant with a local construction company. He is a member of the planning committee for My Hollywood Pride and a member of various GLBTQ plus Disney Facebook groups, including the Gay Pride Disney Monorail Crawl. He describes himself as a nice widow man with a house in Dania Beach, a Disney Vacation Club membership, and a self-supporting cash flow. Interested singles can find him on Facebook and Twitter as Bob Henshaw. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you so much. And the 8th annual Gay Days Disney Monorail Crawl starts Wednesday, May 31st at 7 p.m. at the Outer Rim Lounge at Disney's Contemporary Resort. Join thousands, well, hundreds of your best Disney friends, and join us for the picture in front of the castle at 5 o'clock Saturday, June 3rd. Next, let's welcome anchor Buddy Fry. Buddy is a longtime South Florida resident. He enjoys our large, diverse community and supports many of our local nonprofit organizations like Julian's Fountain of Youth and the Stonewall National Library Museum. Welcome, Buddy.
Thank you very much. We are the reporters for Queer News Tonight, and this evening we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ plus community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast, And here are the bullet points of the queer news for today, Thursday, April 6th, 2023.
It is Thursday, so it's practically the weekend. So let's begin by queering up entertainment. 10 LGBTQ plus shows that were removed from their streaming platforms. One of the worst parts about this current age of streaming is how hard it can be to watch some of our favorite shows. Not only do we have to own a dozen different services to watch all of the shows, now streamers can just simply delete a show off their platform without any notice. Platforms like HBO Max and Showtime have been deleting shows that they created to save money on paying residuals. And it's often been queer shows that are suffering because of it. Here are 10 LGBTQ inclusive shows that have not only been canceled, but deleted by their original streaming platforms. Up first, the L Word, Generation Q. According to Autostraddle, not only has the L Word Generation Q been canceled, but Showtime has also completely removed the show from its streaming platform. Other shows with queer themes that are just gone include 12 Dates of Christmas, Finding Magic Mike, Generation, Legendary, Little Ellen, Masters of Sex, Minx, Westworld, really? And Work in Progress. I get it that, first, we have all this unlimited programming, but, the HBO Max, Showtime, Stars, whatever, doesn't have unlimited server space to put these things out. So some things have to go. But it does seem like a lot of gay shows are just sort of disappearing. I mean, they could have removed Westworld seasons 3 and 4, and I would have been completely fine with it. But 1 and 2 should both still be out there.
Well, but the problem is also we're such a small portion of their audience in terms of numbers. And then you have how many different services and everybody competing for that same audience of 10% or less.
Right.
So I understand, but it is frustrating that you can't just pull it up in another way and pay, allow them to have their residuals when you do watch it.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I'm reminded of something I heard years ago that's kind of in the ballpark with this. And basically that media is neither red nor blue, it's green. It's all about money. And if they're making money off of us, believe me, they'll put it back on. But the minute they're not, we're done.
I agree. That's just like that show. I think it's called Uncoupled. I don't know if you ever
Yes.
saw it. They canceled it, but now they brought it back on a different network.
right.
So, I mean, it just, like, I agree with you. It just depends on how much money you're making. Because I know some platforms, just like the LGBTQ community, when I think about the Black community, there's a lot of shows that they've taken off of some platforms that are catered to Black people. But it's contingent on which streaming site it is.
But I am grateful that, I think we've all forgotten. Remember in the 80s and 90s when you saw a gay character. Now we have a long list of shows that we can celebrate that we have characters in.
Yeah, we did the story a week or two ago on GLAAD's annual media report. And it's basically held steady. Maybe a tick down this year, but it's basically held steady. So as some shows go, new shows come along, new characters come along.
We have to celebrate the fact that we're still being presented in some capacity.
Yeah. True. And does anybody else here still have cable or DirecTV or something, or has anybody else just gone straight to satellite or to streaming?
I still have cable, but I have a whole bunch of streaming channels.
Right. Yeah.
I'm hoping 2023 is the year I cut the cord because it's cheaper to stream.
Yeah.
Well, it really is. Yeah.
It's cheaper to stream.
It is.
Yeah.
I think my cable is actually included with my townhouse. That's the only reason I have cable.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Well, party at your house.
Okay. Next, let's queer up trans rights. Thousands of Catholic nuns unite to wholeheartedly declare trans people are beloved by God. A group of over 6,000 Catholic nuns has joined the fight for trans rights, writing in an open letter that trans and non-binary people are, quote, beloved and cherished by God, end quote. The Sisters of St. Joseph Federation and several other Catholic organizations published an open letter on Trans Day of Visibility that supports the LGBTQ plus community and criticizes the recent influx of oppressive and discriminatory legislation sweeping the U.S. The letter read, quote, "We mark March 31st, International Day of Transgender Visibility, as a time to celebrate and acknowledge and uplift folks who identify as transgender, non-binary, and/or gender expansive. We know our actions and commitments must extend beyond this day's observance, end quote. The nun's letter added that trans people in the United States are experiencing harm and erasure due to anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, discrimination, and harmful rhetoric from some Christian institutions, including the Catholic Church. The Catholic groups who signed the letter share a wish to provide deep belonging for trans people in the church, and even went as far as to say that the church will become an oppressor unless it accepts the LGBTQ plus community. This message of LGBTQ plus acceptance comes shortly after Pope Francis' clarification in January that although he doesn't think being gay is a crime, he still believes that homosexuality is a sin. Buckle up, children. I was raised Roman Catholic. I went to the Catholic grade school. I went to a Catholic high school. I even went to a Catholic college. And my number one question is, where the F were these nuns when I was coming up? Because they sure as hell weren't doing this back in my day. And I take exception with will become an oppressor. Yeah. Excuse me, they already are. They already are. And it's been that way for centuries, not just recently, for centuries, long before I was born. You know, I'm happy they're coming around. I kind of find it, well, maybe I shouldn't find it surprising that it's women, because, I mean, I've seen nuns especially come out and say, this is wrong, that is wrong, the other thing is wrong, when the men, you know, because it's a patriarchy after all, let's get it right. And I'm being polite about my patriarchy. And my train of thought just derailed. But, you know, I'm just happy to see, you know, it always seems like the women are always in front than the men, to me.
From my experience, coming out in the 80s, between high school and college, and in that time period with the AIDS crisis. Mm-hmm. I'm from the Midwest in St. Louis, and some of the biggest staunch supporters of the then developing healthcare programs and housing programs were nuns. So I'm very blessed that most of the nuns in my life were supportive back then, and were on the forefront screaming and demanding and debating. And so, you know, I think the women are going to be in the forefront for the most part. Not every organization is perfect, but my experience with the nuns is they were always the first ones to go, excuse me, this is not right.
And, you know, I think that, and you and I are roughly the same age. Yeah. You're a little more aged than I am, but that's
Thank
okay. But no, in the 80s, when I was also at Catholic high school in Indianapolis, there was, they were the first generation of nuns to be affected by the Vatican II Council, which was aimed at liberalizing, or at least being more understanding in the church and being more inclusive. So I think that sort of collided. And of course, there's been a huge movement to shy away from or run away from the Vatican II liberalizations. Francis has brought it back a little bit, but for an organization that moves over centuries and millennia, not years, it is still very frustrating.
It is very frustrating.
I think it's amazing. I really do think it's amazing. My mother's a minister. I was brought up in the church. I'm Baptist now, but I was raised Methodist, so Christian. And if something like that would happen in my church, I would be like floored, because even though I attend church like every other Sunday, I don't talk about me being trans at church. I go to church, I hear the word, and I leave. I don't know what that would be like to actually have someone at my church advocating for me to be a part. I think it's amazing.
You know, the thing is, there are pockets of allies out there, and there are more pockets than we think, and they're probably bigger than we think. A couple weeks ago, we did the story of German bishops who had signed a letter saying that they will start blessing same-sex unions, divorced unions, other things like that in the coming couple of years. There's also a group, we talked about the hateful legislation that the nuns are railing against, and rightly so. One of those bills was signed this week in Indiana. And a group that I follow, they're called Catholic Allies. They're a Facebook group. They're based out of Indianapolis, and they're just amazing. And they did a post when this was signed, I think it was yesterday, to Indiana transgender people who may feel especially rejected and excluded today. Catholic allies stand with you. We love you for who you are, and we honor your right to exist. Know that we see your value and dignity. We will continue to call for respect, compassion, and sensitivity to be extended to you. And I think that sums it up. There's a lot of lay people out there. There's a lot of great groups like Catholic Allies that are doing this. They're raising money for a scholarship to send kids to college. I mean, they're doing a lot. Our supporters are out there. Let's just make sure, once they identify themselves, let's acknowledge them and let's embrace them the same way that they're embracing
right now,
us.
what's important in all this information, because I too am Roman Catholic in theory. I don't go to church, but I am spiritual and go to other churches instead. The grassroots organizations, the people, the nuns, the programs, the organizations that deal with transgender youth and gay youth and on a daily basis, those are the ones we're getting support with. The problem is the hierarchy that's lost up higher up, whether it be the Vatican or here in the United States. You know, those are the people that have kind of lost touch with the realities of the world, and those are the people that we constantly are seeing bickering and fighting.
Yep.
No different than politicians. The higher up in politics they go, the more they tend to forget what the daily situation is, and they argue over semantics rather than the reality of, is this my paycheck or is this my job? You know, so I always support the grassroots organizations because those are the reality issues.
So even though I said it was amazing, which it is, what I do hope is that it's not just on Trans Day of Visibility,
it's every day.
That it's every single day. Because we always see people for Trans Day of Remembrance and Trans Day of Visibility. They're showing up for the trans community, but after that it's crickets.
Yeah, talk to me next Saturday, you know?
Yeah, truly. So next, let's queer up LGBTQ plus civil rights. U.S. Ambassador to chair meeting on integrating LGBTI human rights and UN Security Council work. The United States held an informal meeting at UN headquarters on integrating the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons into the UN Security Council's work to maintain international peace and security. The U.S. representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, chaired the meeting, which was co-sponsored by Albania, Brazil, Cyprus, Czech Republic, France, Greece, Japan, Malta, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, as well as the UN LGBTI core group. The United States first brought the issue of protection of the rights of LGBTI persons before the Council in August 2015 in the context of ISIL's crimes against LGBTI persons in Iraq and Syria. Expanding upon a recent report of the UN's independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, this year's meeting focused on how gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity dynamics figured into the context of armed conflict and recommended actions the Security Council can take to further incorporate LGBTI perspectives in peace building and peacekeeping. The U.S. Special Envoy to advance the rights of LGBTQI plus persons, Jessica Stern, participated as part of the U.S. delegation. I don't know what I think about this. Tell me what you think about it.
I think it's wonderful that we are participating, that this is happening. Does it have any teeth? No. Does it have any bullets to defend us on the ground in Syria, Iraq,
Uganda,
all
Russia.
those places? But I think it's great that we're taking part of it. I mean, let's be honest. If Florida had an option to attend that meeting, our representatives wouldn't be there.
Right.
And our leader wants to be in Washington. So election, it's just a reminder that there is a lot of good people doing a lot of good work out there, but also that elections matter. Because if the previous president or our governor were to become president, the U.S. would not be part of any of this. And let's be honest, the U.S. is the leader in this. Russia's certainly not going to take a part of it. China's certainly not going to take a part of it. We are, whether you like it or not, we are still a leader, and we need to act like leaders.
Yeah.
But it's also important, I think, with this meeting is that the continued conversation on a groundwork basis. I mean, we're talking, like we mentioned before, there are so many countries out there that absolutely refuse to even acknowledge. So the fact that we're making a discussion point on an organization as important as the UN, with the clout and the capacity to bring people to the table, regardless of your opinion, I mean, that's important that we continue that conversation, whether it moves or not. We are at least there to continue. And sometimes being gay, that's what it's about. It's about continuing the daily battle and celebrating the fact that we can at least discuss it.
When they tell us to shut up, we speak louder.
Exactly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, next, let's queer up religion. It's Easter, and don't you wonder what Jesus would say about the LGBTQ plus community? The subreddit on trans Christianity on Reddit was discussed what Jesus would say about the LGBTQ plus community. One user shared a post asking, quote, "Would Jesus want us to deny ourselves of our dysphoria? Matthew 6:24, end quote. The post asked what Jesus would say if he were alive in modern times. The user said, quote, "I don't believe Jesus would harp on this as a sin. He didn't focus too much on gender or gender roles," end quote. The user also tried to understand the true meaning of Matthew 6:24. As translated in the New International Version of the Bible, quote, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money," end quote. The Reddit user asks if this means that God believes the righteous thing to do is to deny ourselves of the desire to transition and commit to him instead. The account user believes it is possible to commit to God even though the person is transitioned. Rather, the commitment can be better as the person's mental health and well-being are higher. Other Reddit users chimed into this question with their own opinions and views. One saying, quote, "Do not worry about the outside of the cup. It is what is on the inside that brings nourishment or death," end quote. Another user said, quote, "Transitioning is an act of God because it's an act of creation. If Jesus the prophet lived today, he would stand on the side of trans people because he stands on the side of the oppressed. He would take joy in your transition," end quote. And we're on the eve of Easter weekend, and this is Passover, yes, and this is a very interesting take on it that I'm glad that we're doing. Okay, I'm going to throw it back to you. What do you think about this? Your turn.
I love the quote when they said that transition is, what did they say? Transition is an act of creation. Yeah. I love that because I know myself. I transitioned when I was 18 years old. And I believe that
6 years ago?
Yes, that black don't crack. 48. 48. But I never had an issue or felt any type of way later on. Now, when I was younger, I did feel some type of way because of the teachings of the church and all of that. But I just believe that God is concerned about the inside and what you do. That's all.
I actually, because I didn't quite read the story in the beginning, I actually looked up not only this verse.
In the beginning?
Well, not that far back. But on a previous episode, I have quoted Matthew 6:5 against public prayer. I actually read the whole chapter 6, and quite frankly, and I'm going to, if I have this wrong, I'm going to rely on the church lady to correct me.
Oh, not you, the church lady.
Oh, I'm the church lady now.
But when I read this, it's literally about it's about staying humble and avoiding hypocrisy and addressing what one's priority should be. I mean, it's really that simple. It's like, you don't have to be a holier than thou, high and mighty. It's like, if you really want the goodie, you keep quiet.
Well, the problem I'm having with all of this, regardless of who is talking, is that in this day and age, between politics and the Christian extreme evangelistic mindset, people are manipulating the Bible left and right. They're using the 4 or 5 words that they want that benefits them. Mm-hmm. They're twisting it subtly, and they're not reading the whole quote. And they're not going through the whole meaning of that passage, which is important. But even as a sometimes devout Christian, Catholic, Roman Catholic. I've learned in all these years that I've been around, and as you remind me, I am older. Thank you. I'm made in the image of God. That's it. And if God made me who I am, how could that be wrong? Whether it be I love a man or I love a woman. So, I brought this forth to my family, and I have a lot of very religious people in my family, and I was blessed to have a Monsignor in my family. And I just am amazed that they shut up when I say that. Because they realize that that's what the Bible is about. I am created by God in his image. That's it. So how can I be anything less than wonderful?
And later
That's
on,
not my ego speaking, okay?
and later on, they talk about, and I'm going to need your help with this.
Oh, don't do that.
No. It's not the gospel itself, but it's in one of the letters to the early Christians. They talk about there is no slave or free, there is no man or woman. And again, I'm grossly misquoting it, but it's as you said, they pick out thou shalt not sleep with a man as with another man, and then go out to their local seafood restaurant for shrimp and clams,
Right.
which is also prohibited.
Well, there's an interesting, and I don't mean to digress, but there is an interesting documentary that's coming out, and it's running the circuit of all the different movie shows. I mean, at the
festivals?
Festivals, yeah.
Where it discusses the point at which the Bible picked out the word homosexual or created the word homosexual and how it treated it. And there is now this line of thought amongst a certain group of people, intellectuals and people who study the Bible, saying that the word homosexual should not have been defined the way it was, because if you go back to that particular moment in time when it was written, that word could have been anything under the moon. It could have been a man, it could be a woman, it could have been anything. So, and I think that's important, because I think with the current Pope, he is trying to figure out how to desensitize the word, depoliticize the word homosexual and open it up to the church itself. But we have to go through thousands of years of bigotry and thought processes that define us and them, however you want to define it in that moment. But I just think, for a show as great as this, in the LGBT community, I mean, here we are talking about religion and spirituality like we've never discussed before. And I think that's really helpful to how we present ourselves in the world.
Absolutely.
I'm preaching a lot today.
Yeah,
Thank
preach
you.
on.
For you.
No, literally, preach on.
Okay, so next, let's clear up education. Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. Safe Schools South Florida Rainbow Roundtable took place on April 1st and was exclusively broadcasted by Queer News Tonight. In addition to the standard viewing distribution on social media pages, this important discussion about the future of LGBTQ plus youth in Florida was broadcasted live on Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, and Fire TV on the Happening Out Television Network app. Safe Schools' mission is to create safer schools where all students can learn and thrive, regardless of real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identification, gender expression, that of their own or their parents and guardians. This year's roundtables participants included Kai Carey, Javier Gomez, Kaylee LaChapelle, Vaughn Sellers, Ashley Mayfield, Olivia Bergeron Oaks, Harold Marrero, and Aaron Boss-Lund. The roundtable also featured special performances by singer and songwriter Joey Young and a drag performance by Crystal Ross LePage. We invite you to watch this important Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable to learn more. I'm at a loss because I got tongue-tied there.
No, you did great. I think that this is a very important issue, especially here in Florida. Oop, Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
Especially in Florida, yes.
Because, more nefarious legislation is moving forward. Obviously, don't say gay, as anyone who predicts that the sun will rise could have told you, is going to be expanded. There's a motion right now to end all drag cabaret shows under any circumstances in the state. I mean, there's just a lot of bad stuff coming out. And thank God we have good friend of the show and leader of Safe Schools, Scott Galvin, who basically is single-handed. I mean, he's got a great board, but I mean, he is out there every day leading the charge to say, hey, wake up, listen. And because he was talking about things back in September, October, he was like, be on the lookout for this. This is going to be coming. And of course, he's been elected. He's served in office, so he knows how things work and the ebb and flow of things. And he's been out there waving the flag, saying, but not just saying, hey, the fascists are coming. He's also out there raising community awareness and trying to get us to help turn the tide so that that we can move forward in a positive way on LGBTQ rights. I encourage everybody to please find it on Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, all of them, and watch this wonderful and important forum.
I think it's also important that as we discuss topics like Don't Say Gay, that we educate ourselves as a community as to exactly what the legislation is about. It's one of the poorest written pieces of legislation that I have written, and that's what makes it dangerous, because it could be manipulated to anyone's benefit in that moment.
It's intentionally written vague.
And I understand that. But that's why I think it's important that we as a community understand that it's the clarity of the language, and we need to be sure that we're all saying and explaining this correctly. Because as people, I have actually had people come up to me and say, well, what's wrong with this legislation? And the minute I start talking about how vague the language is and how it can be manipulated in turn, then they understand. They just think it's the topic. I can't say gay in the classroom. Well, no, you can't, and this is why you can't, and this is how it can be manipulated. But we're not explaining that, just like I think a lot of gay people don't explain the benefits of gay marriage. It's not a religious process, it's a financial, it's a legal process. And we use the word marriage because that's how the United States federal government, since the day of our conception as a country, has used that term marriage. It's a benefits package. It's not necessarily religious, but it's been manipulated by the religious community to whip up their supporters. So I think we need to, as a community, be very clear and educate ourselves so that we can explain explain our position, and point out why it's poorly written and how it can benefit, how it can benefit others and hurt us. And I just don't see that happening with the community. And I think we have to be a little better at representing ourselves and explaining our position other than we're against it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And then we have to work on our allies. We have to work on our politicians and getting the African American community into it and the Latino community into it. Any community that can be there for support, we have to build better bridges.
I absolutely agree. Unfortunately, nuance and details are not the strong suit of, I was a news writer for 28 years. I'm still a news writer. Nuance and thought are not strong suits of their headlines. That's where the money is. But at least you can take comfort, buddy, in the fact, knowing that every time a same-sex couple marries, a preacher in Oklahoma cries.
An evangelist preacher.
Adriana, take us to church.
Again, she's a church lady.
Oh my goodness. Next, we report on our partnership with Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. We are broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine in supporting that partnership. The Happening Out television network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ plus religious live broadcast in the world every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well, we finish tonight's queer news headlines with a segment we call LGBTQ plus 1 Minute News.
LGBTQ plus 1 Minute News. Let's queer up LGBTQ plus civil rights. Ukraine's march to legalize same-sex marriage takes another step forward. Last month, Ukrainian MP Inna Savsun submitted a bill calling for the legal recognition of same-sex partnerships. The bill has since received support from several Ukrainian political parties and is now making its way through parliament, marking yet another step forward in Ukraine's march toward LGBTQ plus acceptance. Savsun, a member of Ukraine's smallest opposition party, announced her bill via tweets urging Parliament to legalize same-sex marriage by the end of the year. Savsun has since tweeted that 17 other MPs had joined her as co-authors of the bill. Many younger LGBTQ plus Ukrainian activists attribute this transformation to Ukraine's 2014 Euromaidan revolution, which decisively turned the country towards Europe. Since the revolution, lawmakers have consistently passed pro-LGBTQ plus laws to buttress Ukraine's EU membership bid.
LGBTQ plus 1 Minute News. Let's queer up gay culture. A new study on gaydar yields surprising results. Many gay folk pride themselves on being able to judge whether someone else is gay. However, a study has poured cold water on this idea. The study appeared in the Journal of Homosexuality, and the author was Fabio Fasoli from the University of Surrey in England. He took around 130 participants and played audio recordings of other people. He then asked them to say whether they thought the speakers were gay or heterosexual. The study found both straight and gay participants were more likely to categorize speakers as straight. In fact, they labeled so many of the speakers as straight that they both tended to miss the gay speakers. Secondly, both groups were slightly better at identifying gay women than gay men. Gay participants were slightly more likely to identify speakers as gay, but not necessarily accurately.
LGBTQ plus 1 Minute News. Let's queer up entertainment. A brand new gay reality dating show is coming, and Danny Minogue is hosting. The UK is getting its first ever exclusively gay reality dating show on television called I Kissed a Boy. The new series will air on BBC Three and BBC iPlayer, with singer Danny Minogue appearing as the host. Set in Italy, 10 guys will enter a villa looking for love, but before talking, flirting, or doing anything else, the contestants will have to share a kiss first. Kissed a Boy was first announced by the BBC back in May of 2022. This is different from past queer dating shows like Finding Prince Charming, where one leading gay man looked for a love amongst a group of contestants in the style of the Bachelor franchise. So that is today's news for the LGBTQ plus community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ plus evening news show.
If our community is important to you, share this news with your friends and family. Are you, like most of America, part of our very large television audience watching this live LGBTQ plus news broadcast right now on Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, and Amazon Fire TV?
Queer News Tonight is the only live LGBTQ plus digital television show in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support. If our community is to grow, we must tell our stories and bring them to the attention of the broader world.
This is the only place in the world that tells these types of LGBTQ plus stories in motion and sound. That is the passion of Hotspots Magazine, Happening Out Television Network, and Queer News Tonight.
I'm John Hayden, and on behalf of these LGBTQ plus reporters, the anchors of Queer News Tonight, including Bob Henschel, Adriana Tender, Buddy Fry, we will see you daily at 8 p.m. And to our LGBTQ plus world, we wish you good night, a happy Easter, and happy Passover. But before we go, we have one final story, and we queer up the big interview. Gay Barchive's Art Smith tells you what happened to your favorite gay bar. Art Smith sat down with Al Ferguson to discuss his passion project to record the history of LGBTQ+ bars. Smith is a well-known journalist and publisher and has successfully documented more than 3,000 gay bars from our past and concluded over 100 interviews, preserving the memories under this project. He was with us to talk about the importance of the Gay Barchives project and the work being done under this initiative, including his Wilton Manors video project. Getting ready to hear an exciting journey of a fellow community member who is striving to keep LGBTQ+ stories alive by acknowledging the essential part of the LGBTQ+ culture, bars.
Well, we're getting ready to do a very interesting interview because I have an opportunity to talk about gay culture and especially our nightlife and our bars. Joining us tonight at Queer News Tonight is Art Smith, a journalist and publisher. He has a website and a Facebook page that I follow quite closely called gaybarchives.com, and it focuses on the history of our social community and the LGBTQ community. Joining us at Queer News Tonight is Art Smith. Art, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So you've journeyed down, you're in Tampa, and you've come down. We'll talk about the project you're talking about here in South Florida. But let's begin about being the director of the Gay Barchives Project. Explain for everyone that is not familiar with it what you do and what's its purpose.
So the Gay Barchives Project kind of came out of a conversation with a bar owner I knew in Atlanta 30 years ago. And once we started talking about gay bars, it kind of mushroomed and, yeah, do you remember this bar? Do you remember that bar? And I came to the realization that we were recording tons of our history about the protesters, about the marches, about the tragedies that occurred, about the negative legislation. But the biggest part of the community back then, in my opinion, was the bar scene. That's where everything happened. That's where the organizations were founded. That's where the people met each other to form these organizations. That's where the fundraising was done. And I said, nobody seems to be doing this. You can't find information about these bars. So I decided to take it upon myself to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, the Black community and the civil rights movement is documented by the Selma Bridge or churches, a Black church, etc., and the civil rights movement is documented in it. But because of rejection of church, principally, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and really even till today, bars were so important to our civil rights movement. And of course, the most famous in the world is Stonewall.
It is.
And our church is the Stonewall Inn in New York, which is why it's now a national memorial and the National Parks Visitor Center is going. Your project documents this civil rights movement in our gay bars, and your program has documented, I read, more than 3,000 gay bars.
Yes.
And mostly gay bars from the past that are no longer here.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you come across which ones are included? How do you find them? What's the process of doing that?
Well, as I'm sure you know, having your long history in the gay community and in journalism, you know that once.
Did you just call me old?
No, because I think I'm actually older than you.
Okay.
But you know that once you start talking to one person, they have a connection. They say, well, you should also talk to person number two. And person number two says, well, yeah, but I got started because person number three. And so it becomes a big network. It kind of takes on an organic growth pattern. And that's a lot of what happened. Most of the information that I've been able to dig up required sleuthing. It mostly happened before Google, before the internet. So there are no archives to speak of that. And back then the newspapers, mainstream newspapers, did not document gay stories unless they were, really terrible. They were a big headline,
whatever.
So it was some kind of tragedy or some kind of riot.
Right.
And as I started connecting to all these different people, I started getting more and more information and digging further. I actually found in the United States that there are over 100 LGBTQ archives that have internet presence, but they're not coordinated in any way. So I also put on my website a page that lists links to all 100 plus archives. So if you decided you want to know something about a gay bar in, say, Kansas City, you can go to the Kansas section of my archive, click on the GLAMA, which is the Gay and Lesbian Archives of the Midwest, and look at their website and find it. And I started putting all those pieces together. And then, of course, I also connected with some authors who are researching individual projects. Rick Carlin, who happens to live here in Fort Lauderdale, he just released a book of 1,001 gay places in Chicago, and he's working on one that has over 800 documented for South Florida.
His husband, and both of them in the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame, as an anchor at Queer News Tonight. Now, for our viewers that don't understand what Art is doing, let me make sure that I draw attention to what he's already told you. Gay bars from the past that aren't here were the source where you met, and they are the locations that create the fundraising events, our advocacy organizations, the cultural social events in our community. They were born in the gay bar.
Absolutely.
And so you're documenting the places where our social life, our political life, our advocacy life all was born.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, one of the early interviews I did was with Nadine Smith with Equality Florida, and she told me in her interview that Equality Florida never would have become what it is had it not been for the support of the bars and the drag queens and the fundraising that was done in the gay bar community. Equality Florida wouldn't exist the way you see it today.
It's so interesting because today we had a conversation about you, and we're showing some of the branding logos of bars that are no longer with us, and different members of our staff remotely and in visual, in digital conversation, we're talking about your list, and somebody said, "Wait, Torpedo's not here." And it was like, really? Or the living room, or you 3,000, and you've missed.
Oh, I know.
A whole segment. And to me, what was interesting in the conversation, and I pointed that out to our staff that was saying it, is that's exactly what's so interesting about this. Because once you start the conversation, you find out, wait, even with 3,000 bars, we're missing so much of our history.
Absolutely.
And let's start to find it. One of the other things that was interesting to me of what you do is the interviews. You have more than 100 interviews. Tell us a little bit about that, what you do there and what you hope to accomplish.
So I've done over 120 interviews. They could be with anybody. Some are bar owners, some are international celebrities. I've interviewed Bruce Valanche, for example. I've interviewed people who own numerous bars. I've interviewed bartenders. I've interviewed authors who have written about bars or the gay scene. I've interviewed patrons. But the idea is that they each have stories to tell. Anybody who was a part of the gay community 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, they have a story to tell about a favorite bar or a bar that they had a special experience in, or they met their partner, or they started a business or whatever. And so I got the idea that I would do first-person interviews with these people, mostly by Zoom, and catalog all this information. One of the people I actually knew in person from Atlanta was a gentleman by the name of Ted Binkley. He was a bar owner in Atlanta. He owned Illusions, which was a big drag club, and he was also an owner of Crazy Rays. When he started telling his story, his first gay bar experience was in Nashville, Tennessee in 1952. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's 70 plus years ago. Mm-hmm. And those kind of stories will get lost. They will not be around. So while you might be able to find out that torpedoes existed because you stumble across an ad or an article, you don't know how big it was, what the clientele was, how long it lasted.
The famous people that came through it, or any of that.
So that's what keeps me going. And I love every time I interview somebody about their bar stories, adds to my base of knowledge, and it puts a smile on my face because there's another story that's been saved for posterity.
You know, it's interesting to me. I dare say 7 out of 10 viewers right now have no idea what the Dameron Guide is. And the Dameron Guide was our institutional Bible that said, wait, if you're in Mobile, Alabama, here's where gay people gather.
Right.
And that doesn't exist anymore because we have Google and we have X and Y and Z. But in a way, you're doing the same kind of thing. One of the things, Art, that I think is also interesting is you're so dedicated to doing this. And I can't help but wonder, is this, we have here in Fort Lauderdale, as you know, the Stonewall National Museum and Archives is here. And I'm not sure that they're as centric on the social culture of our bars or not. We have a new executive director, and maybe he'll watch this interview and go, oh, wait, we need to focus more on this. But one of the things that's interesting to me about what you're doing is I can't help but wonder if Gen Zers, we have a lot of Gen Zers and millennials involved in Queer News Tonight or It's Happening Out, if they would be as interested in what bars existed in the 1990s while we were at the height of AIDS and how the bars interacted with our response to ACT UP and AIDS. Do you think that is an accurate assessment, that this is a more older, our history is important to us, and that our younger siblings and LGBT might not get this?
That was my initial thought when I first started the project. Most of the people I interacted with, most of the people that I interviewed, they had bar experiences at least back to the 80s or so. But as time's moved on, I found that that's changed. And one thing that is, I think, indicative of the fact that there is some hope that the younger generations are interested is if you look at college curriculums around the country, there are actually many colleges around the country that have doctorates in LGBT studies. And you're seeing people who are professors at major universities that are teaching nothing but gay history. There's one guy that's out in California that I've interviewed who has a website that's dedicated to digitally documenting the Dameron Guides by year and state. So you can go to his website, which is mappingthegayguides.com, and you can pick 1966. You can pick Alabama, and you can see a list, every listing that was in Dameron's Guide, which, somebody obviously must want that, or he would not be doing it.
Right. Same for gay archives. And to your point, I learned just this week, shockingly, that I didn't know it. The University of Miami has a student union program where they have a doctoral staff running the student union at the University of Miami, a private university. I have to make sure that that's clear. It's not public, so our governor doesn't have his hands in it. And they have a queer studies minor, and there's 70-some students at the University of Miami in queer studies taking a minor in queer studies. It's fascinating. Let's talk about the bars. We, as I said, are showing some of the images of bars in the past, and I just want you to quickly zero in on some of the questions I want to ask. In your research, either an interview or the history of these 3,000 bars that you've chronicled, most interesting, jumps right off at the top of your head, most interesting stories of any bars from the past?
Well, there's one that's interesting, but in a historically significant way. I have been around the gay scene. My first gay bar experience was 1978. So I've been around for a number of years. And I did not know that in New Orleans, there was a small bar called the Upstairs Lounge that was destroyed by arson, that 30 plus people were killed there, including the pastor of the MCC church in New Orleans. And it was the largest gay tragedy that happened prior to Pulse. Yeah. Now, when Pulse happened, everybody said, oh, this is the biggest tragedy ever in the gay world. They never even referenced the previous one that held that record for 40 years. Yeah. So just to be able to learn about that kind of story, that there are significant events tied to bars that we never heard about, even being active in the community for 40 years, tells me that there was a need for for this kind of research.
Yeah, I'm very proud. Queer News Tonight, we've told that story of the upstairs lounge, so I get a check, an A, from Art Smith in Barchives history. In terms of most interesting, tell me another story in terms of something that you just, wow, this just shocked me. It's so funny, or it's so gay, or whatever it might be.
Well, I don't know. The funny stories don't always come out quite as blatantly as some of the other ones do. But one thing that kind of that I thought was interesting, and of course I lived through it, I knew it from personal experience. But in Atlanta in the 70s, there was a Limelight. And Limelight, owned by Peter Gatien, had numerous bars around the country. Most of them were not specifically focused on gay bars. But I've interviewed several people that were affiliated with the Limelight in New York, which everybody knows about. And there are quite a number of stories about the random things that went on in Limelight, about the concept of, for instance, I interviewed Ernie Glam. He was the guy that ran around in the 6-foot-tall chicken suit at all the Limelight gay events, and became an icon on his own in the underground culture there. I had dinner here in Fort Lauderdale last year with Michael Fazzackerly, who was a guy that documented photographically that scene back in the in the 90s when it was happening, when nobody was taking pictures of club kids outside of a smoke-filled bar room. And they all had interesting stories to tell about Peter Gatien, but unfortunately, issues of libel kind of restrict me from talking too much about what went on behind the scenes there. But it was a very colorful history with the Limelight and their pursuit of the gay market.
All right, so we'll do a postscript, audience. We'll do a postscript, and I'll get Art to tell me, and then I won't worry about libel. I'll just repeat, this is what I've heard, and that's how we'll get it up. Let's talk about Wilton Manors. You're here in Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors. We always make the joke at Queer News Tonight that we're in the gayest place on planet Earth, and arguably it is. We'll argue with our brothers and sisters in Palm Springs and West Hollywood and the Castro. I think we might have them beat. Tell us about why you're here, the Wilton Manors video project you're doing.
Well, I've been to Wilton Manors numerous times as a tourist. I have been here.
You're a gay man, after all.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, the Fort Lauderdale scene, I have early memories going back to the Copa and the Marlin Beach Hotel, and it was always a mecca. I mean, for decades, the Fort Lauderdale metropolitan area has had a major impact on the gay scene. Now, a few years ago when I came back here and went to Wilton Manors, I thought Wilton Manors was a little neighborhood or a side street. I didn't know what it was. But having come back numerous times, I have been to Stonewall many times. I was there today for 2 hours doing more research. And I started looking into it more, and I found out it's 2 square miles. For people who don't understand, it is less than half the size of Key West. Key West is a tiny nothing, and Wilton Manors is smaller than that. It's around 12,000 people that live there. Yeah. But yet, in a 2-mile radius from the center of Wilton Manors, there are more than 25 gay alcoholic beverage establishments, a couple dozen gay-friendly restaurants.
We apparently have an alcohol problem in Wilton Manors.
Well, we can thank George Kessinger for facilitating that.
Exactly, George's alibi.
I spoke with him yesterday. But the more interesting part to me is not only that, because there are other places you can go and find half a dozen gay bars that you can walk to from each other. But Wilton Manors, everything is open and accepting. It's to me, a flashback to, the 80s when some of these, like Atlanta, Midtown or whatever, when these areas were up and coming gay ghettos and everything was very gay. There's a cigar bar that opened, had their grand opening ribbon cutting last night. Yep. Tap That Ash. A gay cigar bar. Where have you ever heard of a gay cigar bar? Right across the street, there's Wilton Creamery, a gay ice cream store. Oh. There's To the Moon, which is like the most incredible candy shop on the planet. Right. There's 3 gay men's clothing stores in the same plaza as Alibi and Hunter's.
I tell my friends all over the world, Yeah, you know the shopping center that you go into? Imagine that your shopping center being gay.
Yes.
The entire shopping center.
Yes, exactly. And so I decided when I came down this time, instead of doing strictly one-on-one interviews about your bar experiences, I was going to take Wilton Manors and do maybe an hour long or longer, depending on how it turns out, kind of documentary focusing on how gay and diverse the entire area is and letting people sample things other than just the bars. They're going to see, oh, wow, look at this cool ice cream shop. Oh, wow, look at this, you know.
Almost like a travel.
Right, like a travel blog, but this is the gayest place on the planet, and it probably is.
Yeah.
You know, other places may take the crown seasonally. Palm Springs is a little bit more seasonal. Fire Island is definitely seasonal. P-Town is seasonal. Right. Wilton Manors is
we're gay
24/7, 365, and you can be as gay as you want walking down that street. Exactly. You probably run into a rainbow striped police car while you're there.
Oh, that's exactly right. Let's talk about our two beloved communities, yours and mine, although I kind of claim both. Tampa Bay, from your history of bars of the past, the absolute most interesting of the gay bars of the past was what?
For me, Trax El Goya.
Oh my God!
It has
thought of Trax, my head just exploded.
It has such a storied history. It changed hands several times. At one point, it was owned by the Cavan Enterprises out in Dallas, Texas. At one point in time, it was owned by the same group that owned Parliament House in Orlando. It changed names a couple times. The original Trax, by the way, is still in operation. Not in Tampa, but the one in Denver, right?
Mm-hmm, Denver.
The one in Denver is still operating. But it was just such a dynamic place, and it was in the heart of a ghetto at the time. Ybor, at that time, and you may remember it, when you went to Trax El Goya,
dangerous almost.
When you went, I was told the first time I went to Trax El Goya, park in a spot where you can spit on the building. Because if you have to walk more than half a block, you might not make it to the front door of the bar.
Oh my God.
It is now a luxury boutique hotel. But for decades, it was El Goya, it was Trax, it was Pleasure Dome.
Most amazing drag shows.
Beautiful, and a big bar. They had a huge show bar, they had a huge garden bar, they had a huge disco dance bar on the side, they had a lobby bar. There was a lot of huge there. And it was awesome.
Yeah.
And to me at that time, that was in the early to mid 80s when I went there the first time. The thing about it was you felt like you'd arrived. If you had lived mostly in smaller towns, your gay bar was a hole in the wall with a rear entrance and a little like green star by the door, so you know what it was. No signs, no open lighting, nothing to identify it. And this place was like going to Radio City Music Hall. Yeah. You were like, oh my God, look how cool this is.
Yeah, the dance room was just breathtakingly.
It was an amazing experience.
And then we move to South Florida. Best memory or best history research of bars of the past in South Florida. The absolute top would be?
Well, the story that I like, and I wrote a little article about it for a digital gay magazine called Happening. I'm sure you're familiar with it. The Copa chain. I loved the Copa when I came down to the Copa in Fort Lauderdale. It was another example of an early bar that was huge and incredible light show, incredible sound, incredible talent. They brought people like Grace Jones and Madonna in there to perform.
Madonna performed in Copa.
Yes.
RuPaul.
Yes.
Long before big.
So it made you feel like you'd arrived because you weren't getting secondhand talent in a little dumpy bar, a dive. You were in a palace seeing first-rate talent.
Yeah.
But what really appealed to me about that story when I got into it, and I've talked to numerous people who were subsequent owners of Copa, the guy who managed the one in Key West from the day it opened till the day it closed, Scott Childs. The stories about the Copa and the one in Fire Island, which I never knew existed.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing about the Copa to me is that all three of them were destroyed. They were not sold and vanished. The one in Fire Island was open one season, mysteriously burned to the ground right across from the Ice Palace, which is still there.
Yeah, mysteriously.
Mysteriously. And it had the same kind of talent, same kind of shows. Grace Jones, I'm pretty sure, performed there, and some other people. Right. The one in Key West was open longer.
And what mysteriously happened there?
It, while it was open with a crowd, I think it was on a Sunday night, it mysteriously went up in flames.
Wow.
Nobody was injured. Everybody got out safely.
Ridiculous.
The building was destroyed, and it later opened again as a gay bar briefly. I think it was called Epoch.
Okay. I don't remember that.
And then the third one, which was really the first, right here in Fort Lauderdale, that one was open for what, 15, 20 years?
Yeah. And mysteriously
got blown away by a hurricane.
I know, it's just...
So, and on top of that, the guy who was behind all three of those locations, John Castelli, was a realtor who is one of the people who's responsible for bringing gays to Wilton Manors, and still to this day has a realty office right across from the heart of Wilton Manors on Wilton Drive.
Castelli is our green room when we broadcast and put on the Stonewall Pride Parade. Castelli's office is our green room, and mysteriously it's still there. So we're very happy about that. So COPA. Last week I did an interview with Dean Trentellis, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, and we were talking about the Rainbow Crosswalk out at the beach, and Marlin Beach came up, and it was interesting because we had the conversation that in the 1970s, when the Marlin was there and the bar, that the mayor of Fort Lauderdale said gays don't exist in Fort Lauderdale, just like Putin does today
right.
in Russia. And today, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale is gay. So flowing out of the gay bars of the Marlin days in the 1970s. Art, I want to kind of wrap up to ask you about the gay bar experience. We've had a dramatic reduction. While we haven't talked much about the women, we're down to 27 bars in the United States for women. And gay bars aren't necessarily the kind of machine to create our civil rights and our social protests that it once was. Where are we going in America with gay bars?
Well, I'm hoping, based on some of the ones... as I developed into this Gay Barchives project, I got about a year and a half in, and I kept saying to myself, why did nobody document these bars when they were around? Why am I doing it 20, 30, 40, 50 years later? And then I slapped myself in the face, and I said, Art, you're not talking about the bars that are opening now. So I started looking at new bars as well, and I've interviewed several bar owners who have just recently opened brand new queer establishments. And I do want to clarify one thing, and I'm sure, Al, that you're aware of this because, we came up around the same time. To me, the word...
Did you just call me old?
No. I'm celebrating my 29th birthday this week.
Good for you.
So, gay, to me, is the same exact thing as queer and LGBTQ. There was none of that back then. So, in any event, the new bars... the queer bars that are opening up, they have a little bit different take. Some of them have a family element to them where they're also opening a coffee shop or some family-friendly aspect of it that people can go to earlier in the day. They have a separate alcoholic beverage area where they do, maybe drag shows and things like that. But there's one, for example, in Washington, D.C. called As You Are Bar. It's opened up by two women who are partners, and they refer to it as a queer bar, and it is very open and accepting to everyone. And as they say, they don't care if you're gay, straight, or sideways, as long as you respect the patrons, everybody. If you're gay, you respect the straight patrons. If you're, trans, you respect the cisgender patrons. Everybody, just respect everybody else. We want everybody to be welcome here. And I'm hoping that's where the future, as we start to lose some of the purely what we would call gay identity, that is what the future brings us, is more places that are very open.
Yeah. Art, we're going to have you back to Queer News tonight, because we're going to have to talk about places, shockingly here in South Florida, how many LGBT have never heard of the Warsaw? Or
Warsaw Ballroom.
The Warsaw Ballroom, or we're getting to the point where how many will have never heard of the Parliament House. It's just shocking.
Or Salvation. There was another one. There were so many in Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's just incredible. So Art, people interested in the history, you're basically a history lesson that's a lot of fun. And history and interviews, getting to see these old logos, learning about them. Best way to learn more about what you're doing, how should they do that?
Well, of course, my website, gabarchives.com. On the homepage of my website, I have links to all of our social media accounts. They are all at Gabe Archives. Yeah. So whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, at Gabe Archives, YouTube. All my videos are on YouTube as well, so there's 120 segments on there. They're all on my website. And I have a Facebook group, which is also called Gabe Archives. We have about 5,600 active members who constantly are posting remarks and questions. Do you remember this bar? Did you ever go there? I met my ex at this bar. Right. And people just interact, and that's how we learn about a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah, it's a great history lesson. I highly encourage you to go and do it. It gives you a glimpse of our past. Wherever you're listening to us, Art has focused on one of the more than 3,000 bars that are associated with this history lesson, and a big, gigantic percentage of them right here in Florida. But you did miss Sea Monster, and we have one staff member that just is not going to forgive you. You missed Sea Monster.
Well,
and the living room.
My answer to that is I am one person, and even if I have it in a notebook and it hasn't made it onto the website yet, does not necessarily mean I don't know about it. But I also encourage them to go to the website or go to my Facebook page and comment on it there, so that other people know about it too. But I was aware of both of those bars.
All right. Well, it's fascinating. You want to learn more about our great LGBT social history. And remember, the interesting thing here is we're talking really about the entire civil rights era of our community, because our political advocacy, our health and social advocacy of AIDS have all reached out and grown from our bar scene in LGBTQ. So check it out, gaybararchives.com. Art Smith, thank you very much for being with us at Queer News Tonight.
Thank you.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.